Now here's what I want us to pay attention to, bidnillahi ta'ala. I want to give you 4 incidents, and I want you to pay attention to them, inshallah ta'ala. The first one is Musa alayhi salam when he defeats the Pharaoh. And how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can break every single law of nature as He sees fit, because Allah is the author of those laws, not you. And when we put our logic over His miracles, and when we place our odds over His qadr, over His divine decree, we've already lost the plot before it even started. Case of Musa alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam is in front of the water with his companions on that day of Ashura. And what's happening here? Right? Allah Azza wa Jal tells Musa alayhi salam to strike the sea. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala parts the sea. But pay attention to the details, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give you details unless they are relevant. كَالْطُولِ الْعَظِيمِ. There's a visual here. Imagine the sea parting, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turning each side of the sea into a mountain. It was like a mountain. Can you imagine the visual? Musa alayhi salam standing with his people, and his people saying to him, Inna lamudrakun, we've been caught, we're done, give it up, the odds are against us. Kalla inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdeen. No, Allah is with me, He's going to guide me. And Musa alayhi salam strikes the sea, and Allah Azza wa Jal turns the seas into 2 mountains, frozen in space. And they just walk through. Suddenly, it's a completely dry earth in front of them, and you have 2 mountains of water. Here's the thing. Allah Azza wa Jal controls the laws of nature. Musa alayhi salam is not surprised by this. This is how his relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal is. Notice that Musa alayhi salam has gone through many trials and tribulations in the past, and he doesn't turn back to Allah and say, oh Allah, if you could have done this the whole time, then why couldn't this have happened just back then and it'd be over with? Musa alayhi salam proceeds. Fir'aun is a materialist. Fir'aun, as Imam al-Tabari rahimahullah says, he thinks, well, whatever just froze these 2 bodies of water on the side, if the laws of nature bent for him, they bent for me too. So Fir'aun willingly walks into it because he says, well, clearly whatever scheme is out there and whatever nature is out there, it works for him, it's going to work for me as well. So he willingly enters into that path, like the fool that he is. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala breaks down that water and drowns him and his people in that moment with that same water. Pay attention to the elements. There's an obstacle ahead. There's an enemy behind. There are naysayers present. This is actually the case of every single one of these stories, by the way. And by the way, if your political commentary on Gaza sounds like Inna lamudrakun, we're done, then how are you fasting in solidarity or in gratitude with Musa alayhi salam, who's saying, Kalla inna ma'i rabbi sayahdeen? If your heart is actually there, then you need to be reprogrammed. You need to be reprogrammed. So there are naysayers, there's an enemy behind, there's an obstacle in front, and there are doubters, naysayers that are present. And Allah Azza wa Jal takes care of all of those elements. And what happens? The law of nature. The water is frozen into mountains. Now come to Nuh alayhi salam. Another incident. Nuh alayhi salam was building his ark on dry land. There are no elements of a flood. The people are walking by him and mocking him. Like, what are you doing over there? Building the ark, like Allah Azza wa Jal commanded me to. Can you imagine someone in the middle of a desert building an ark, preparing for a big flood? What flood are you talking about? Not only that, Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah says, there was not a cloud in the sky when the flood actually happened. So the enemies are walking by, mocking Nuh alayhi salam, he's building his ark. You can imagine that his followers are not all of the same quality. Some of them are probably like, what's happening here? We're building this ark for a flood. Where is the flood? No clouds in the sky. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? فَرْجَرْنَا الْأَرْضَ عُيُونًا. SubhanAllah. The flood came from under. Allah cracked the earth and the flood actually came from under. So it didn't even come from above. They're looking above and they're saying, no clouds in the sky. We're not really worried about this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought it from the place that they did not actually anticipate. Because we've never heard of a flood from below. But it happens that way. Connect to Ibrahim alayhi salam. And we're just coming out of the Hijjah. When Ibrahim alayhi salam is being thrown into the fire remained. It still burned. It was still a hardship. It was still very difficult. There's still the humiliation. There's still the stripping down of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim alayhi salam is thrown into the fire. And Allah did not extinguish the fire, He just changed its nature. Ya naru kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. Fire, be cool and peaceful upon Ibrahim alayhi salam. Don't burn. Be cool and peaceful. So it still burned as far as the visual was concerned. But Ibrahim alayhi salam did not feel the pain of it at all. And he walked out of that fire unharmed. And then you come to finally the fourth incident. So you got the people, subhanAllah, the people mocking in every single one of these incidents. They're the naysayers. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, imagine the whole crowd is against you. And no one is with you except for your wife Sarah. Fourth incident is Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who historically was martyred on this day. He goes out there, and yes, he made a plan. He strategically had something in place. The plan came apart. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested him with shahada. People let him down, betrayed him, did not come out to fight alongside him. But guess what? The sword actually cut. Struck his neck. The same way that it cut Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu was martyred. Stushhida. Allah did not change the law of nature. There were people, there's an obstacle ahead, an obstacle behind. Now I want to make this practical, and I need to start wrapping up my khutbah, and I understand that. The first thing, the dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَاحْفَظْنِي مِنْ بَيْنِ يَدَيَّ وَمِنْ خَلْفِي وَعَنْ يَمِينِي وَعَنْ شِمَالِي وَمِنْ فَوْقِي وَأَعُوذُ بِعَظَمَتِكَ أَنْ أُخْتَالَ مِنْ تَحْتِي. One of the morning and evening remembrances of the Prophet ﷺ is, Oh Allah, protect me from ahead of me, from behind me, from my right, from my left, from above me, and I seek refuge in you from being pulled from beneath me. The reality is that you need Allah Azza wa Jall's protection from all directions, the ones that you know and the ones that you don't know. So make those types of dua even when things become very, very difficult. The second thing, dear brothers and sisters, and it's extremely important, that if when you make dua, you are functionally an atheist in your dua. What do I mean by that? You've subjected yourself entirely to the odds and to the logic of the situation. So when you're making your dua, unless you can logically believe it, you don't even bother making that dua. You don't ask Allah to change what seems to be an impossible situation. And even if you do it mechanically, like as a formality, because the odds are too large. The laws of nature are there. By the way, there's a difference between al-akhdhu bil-asbab, to take the means for victory and to do what you need to do while you make your dua and put your trust in Allah, and actually worshiping the means and being subjected to the means. And if you can't see the means changing in your favor, then your dua is weak or non-existent as a whole. That's not the way the believer makes his dua. It's not the way the believer calls upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's not just for overcoming a large enemy. That's for overcoming a disease. That is for overcoming an impossible situation. That's for seeing yourself through what appears to be an inevitably broken marriage. That's what you do when you find yourself being oppressed at a micro level by someone and you feel like no one's going to believe me, I have no way to actually overcome this oppressor. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not subjected to those means. Allah is not subjected to those odds. So when you make those du'as, don't make those du'as with those calculations of the odds and say it just went from 60% to 80% to 90%, and your dua is proportional to the logic and to the odds. That's problematic. Believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Believe in Allah Azza wa Jall's power. Believe in His ability to change what's a quote-unquote impossible situation. This isn't nostalgia. That's why you're fasting. That's why you're connecting to these incidents. And whether that's your grand political analysis or on a deeply personal level, renew that tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.